Marcus Webb was 39 years old, and for 8 years he had let his wife believe he was exactly what he appeared to be. He drove a 14-year-old pickup with a cracked taillight. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation, and he carried his lunch in a steel box his grandmother had given him when he turned 18. Her friends called him the handyman, and Simone never corrected them. Why would she? It was useful having a husband people underestimated. It made her shine brighter by comparison. So when he came home that Tuesday in March and found his mother's suitcases on the curb in the rain, the zippers half open, a sweater sleeve dragging in the gutter water, he did not shout. He stood in the driveway of the house he had quietly maintained for years and looked at the woman who had raised him, sitting on a folding chair on the sidewalk with her hands folded in her lap, calm in the way only old hurt makes a person calm. 71 years old, put out in the rain like furniture nobody wanted. Simone stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, explaining that the house was hers now, that she needed the space, that Eleanor had become a burden on the marriage. Behind her, a man Marcus had never met leaned against the kitchen counter holding a glass of Marcus's bourbon. What Simone never thought to ask, not once in 8 years, was whose name was actually on the deed to the building she had just claimed as her own, or why a quiet man who fixed cracked tiles for a living had a lawyer on retainer. She thought she was throwing out an old woman. She had no idea she was tearing down the one wall that had been holding up everything she stood on. What happened next would cost Simone every brick she thought she'd stolen. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came in slow through the front windows, catching the grain of the oak banister Marcus had sanded and refinished by hand the previous fall. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cradled in both palms, the steam rising in a thin column, and he listened to the house. He could read a house the way some men read people. The settle of the joists, the breath of the old radiators, the small, honest sounds of a structure doing its work. This one talked to him. It always had. He had grown up in this building, 3 stories of red brick on a corner in a working-class stretch of Richmond, the kind of street where everyone knew everyone and the porches stayed swept. His grandmother had bought the building in 1979 with money she saved cleaning offices downtown, and she had run it like a small kingdom of dignity, renting the upper floors to families who needed a fair landlord and keeping the ground floor for herself. When she passed, the building went to Marcus's mother, Eleanor, and Eleanor, quietly years ago, had signed it into a trust with her only son as the named manager and beneficiary. His grandmother used to say, "Land remembers who took care of it. People forget. Land doesn't." Marcus had never forgotten he worked with his hands because he liked the truth of it. Tile framing, restoration. He ran a small crew that took on historic homes, the ones with bones worth saving. And he was good enough that wealthy clients across 3 counties knew his name even if his own wife pretended his work was a hobby. He kept the money quiet. The building generated income he funneled back into more property. Slowly, patiently, the way his grandmother taught him. By 39, he owned 4 buildings outright. Only his accountant and his lawyer knew the full shape of it. Simone knew none of it, and that had been a choice. He remembered the night they met, 10 years back, at a friend's cookout. She had laughed at something he said and touched his arm and asked him real questions, or what he believed at the time were real questions. She had seemed warm then, before the wanting set in, before she started measuring everything, the cars in the neighbors' driveways, the labels on her friends' purses, the size of the wedding her cousin had thrown. He had watched the warmth in her cool into something that calculated. He had told himself it was a phase. That morning she came down in a robe he didn't recognize, kissed the air beside his cheek, and said she'd be out late. New perfume, sharp and expensive. She didn't mention buying it, he noticed. He said nothing. His mother lived in the ground floor apartment now, the way his grandmother had. Eleanor had grown frailer that winter, slower on the stairs, and Simone had begun making small comments about all the space being wasted. Marcus had let them pass, the way you let a draft pass while you decide where the gap is. That afternoon, his phone buzzed with a text from the upstairs tenant, Mrs. Okafor, a woman who had lived in the building 20 years. It said only, "Marcus, you need to come home. Now." He set down the coffee, he stood, and he drove. He didn't speed. That was the first thing he noticed about himself, the way you notice the weather. He drove the exact limit, both hands on the wheel, while something cold and clear settled over him like the first coat of primer going onto bare wood. When he pulled up, the suitcases were already on the curb. His mother was already in the rain. Mrs. Okafor stood under the upstairs eave with her hand over her mouth. Marcus got out of the truck and walked to his mother first. He took off his jacket and put it over her shoulders. He crouched down so his eyes were level with hers. "How long have you been out here?" he asked. "About an hour," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't shake. She had raised him not to give people the satisfaction. "She changed the locks this morning, baby. While you were on the job, had a man come do it." His hands didn't shake either. He looked at the new brass deadbolt gleaming on the door his grandmother had painted green in 1981. "Stay here," he said. "I'm going to get your chair out of the rain." Inside, through the front window, he could see Simone and the stranger moving around the kitchen, comfortable, like people who believed the matter was settled. Simone was on her phone, smiling. The man laughed at something. Marcus stood on the sidewalk in the rain and watched them, and he did not knock. He took out his phone and photographed the suitcases, the curb, the new lock, the timestamp. He photographed his mother's face. He walked the perimeter of the building, slow, and photographed the changed lock on the side entrance too. Then he opened a banking app no one in that house knew existed and looked at 3 account balances, and a calm older than his anger moved through him. He called Mrs. Okafor down and got his mother settled in the upstairs apartment with tea. Then he went back to his truck, sat in the dry quiet of the cab, and made a single phone call. "Patricia," he said when she picked up. "It's Marcus Webb. I need you to pull the trust file and the building deed, and I need you to clear your morning tomorrow." He paused. "She put my mother out in the rain today, and she doesn't know whose name is on anything." He listened a moment. "No," he said. "I don't want to call the police. I want to do this right. I want it documented, and I want it permanent." He hung up. The rain ran down the windshield in long, clean lines. He sat there and let himself feel it, just once, all the way through, and then he set it down, the way you set down a tool when the measuring is done and the cutting is about to start. He opened a folder on his phone and named it. Eleanor. Patricia Vance had been his grandmother's lawyer, and then his mother's, and now she was his. She was 66 years old, silver-haired, and she wore reading glasses on a chain, and never once in 30 years had Marcus seen her rush. Her office smelled like paper and coffee. She laid the documents across her desk one at a time, the way a surgeon lays out instruments. "The building is held in the Eleanor Webb Family Trust," she said. "You are the trustee and the manager. Your wife has no interest in it. None. It was never marital property. Your grandmother and your mother saw to that long before Simone signed a marriage license." "And the apartment she's living in," Marcus said. "Our home." Patricia's eyes went sharp over the glasses. "Also part of the building. Also the trust. Your wife has been living this entire time in a unit she has no legal claim to. The locks she changed are on a door she does not own." She folded her hands. "Marcus, your mother, is the rightful resident of that ground floor apartment under the trust's terms. What your wife did this morning, putting an elderly trust beneficiary out into the street, that's not just cruel. That's actionable." She slid one more sheet toward him. "Now," she said, "tell me about the man." He told her what he'd seen. Patricia made a note and said she'd have an investigator pull a few threads by Friday. "When a woman moves this fast and this bold," she said, "it usually means she thinks she already has what she needs. Let's find out what she thinks she has." That evening, Marcus visited his Uncle Theo, his grandmother's last living brother, 80 years old and sharp as a chisel, on a porch 2 streets over. Theo listened to the whole thing without interrupting, rocking slow. "Your grandmother knew," Theo said finally. "Knew that girl was hungry the day you brought her around. She told me that one's measuring the house. I told her to let you find out your own way." He spat off the porch. "Some folks, you give them a roof, they start wondering how to take the walls too." "I gave her everything she could see," Marcus said. "She wanted what she couldn't. Here's what your grandmother used to say when somebody tried to take from her. Don't fight a thief. Just let them keep reaching until their whole arm's in the trap." He looked at his nephew. "That girl's still reaching, son. Don't grab her wrist. Wait." By Friday morning, Patricia's investigator had found the rest. The man's name was Darnell Price. He sold luxury real estate and had 2 civil judgments against him for fraud, a pattern of moving into the homes of women with assets and consolidating their accounts. Simone, it turned out, had already added him as an authorized user on a credit line and had opened a joint account into which she'd been moving money, $19,000 over 4 months, skimmed in pieces from the household funds Marcus deposited. She had also, Patricia discovered, met with a different lawyer 3 weeks earlier to ask whether she could claim the building in a divorce. That lawyer had told her no. She had thrown his mother out anyway, betting that possession and intimidation would do what the law wouldn't. Marcus read the file twice. $19,000. 4 months. A man with a documented history of doing exactly this to exactly this kind of marriage. She's not improvising, he said quietly. She's running a play. She just doesn't know I built the field. He went home that night and slept on a cot in the upstairs apartment beside his mother's room, and in the morning he went down and knocked on his own front door like a guest. Simone answered, surprised, then arranged her face into something wounded. Marcus, baby, I know you're upset about your mother, but she really can't. You're right, he said calmly. We should sit down, all of us. Sunday, I'll have the paperwork ready so we can settle everything properly. She blinked. She had expected a fight. The calm unbalanced her. Yes, she said. That's mature of you. I'm a builder, Simone, he said. I don't tear things down. I figure out what's load-bearing and what isn't. He smiled, and it did not reach anywhere. Bring Darnell, he should be there for this too. He turned and walked back to his truck. Behind him he heard the door close, slow and uncertain. Sunday came clear and bright. Marcus chose the ground floor apartment for it, the one with his grandmother's green door. He set chairs around the dining table and laid 2 folders, closed, at the head of it. Simone arrived with Darnell in a tailored coat, the 2 of them carrying themselves like landlords inspecting a property. They didn't expect to find Patricia Vance already seated, or Uncle Theo by the window, or Eleanor in her own chair, dry and composed with a cup of tea. What is this? Simone said. Not quite a question. This is a meeting about the building, Marcus said. Sit down. He laid the pages out one at a time, the way Patricia had taught him, slow enough for the room to read each one. This is the deed, he said. This building is held in a family trust. My grandmother's, then my mother's. I'm the trustee. He laid down the next page. Simone, you've never had any legal interest in it. Not the building. Not this apartment. Not the home you changed the locks on Tuesday. He set down another. The man you hired to change those locks did so on a door you don't own. My mother is the named resident here. You put a 71-year-old trust beneficiary into the street in the rain. Patricia can explain what that exposes you to. Patricia spoke once, cleanly, naming statutes. Simone's face began to change, confidence cooling into calculation into the first edge of fear. Marcus opened the second folder. This is the joint account you opened with Mr. Price. $19,000 moved from household funds in pieces over 4 months. He looked at Darnell. And these are the 2 fraud judgments against you in Henrico County, and the deposition from the last woman whose house you tried this in. He set them down gently. You picked a marriage you thought had a soft wall. You didn't check the foundation. Darnell stood up fast, the chair scraping. You don't have anything. Sit down, son, said Uncle Theo from the window, not loud at all, before you embarrass yourself in a house that was standing before your daddy was born. Simone reached across the table, her eyes filling on command. Marcus, baby, I made a mistake. I was scared. I wasn't thinking. Your mother and I, we can fix this. We're a family. It was Eleanor who answered, setting her teacup down with a small, clean click. You put me out in the rain, child, his mother said quietly. Family doesn't do that. You don't get to remember the word now that the door swung back on you. The room went still. Marcus stood. He gathered the photographs of his mother on the curb and slid them back into the folder. I'm not angry, Simone, he said. I want you to understand that. Anger would mean I still expected something from you. I don't. He buttoned his jacket. You spent 8 years thinking the quiet man was the small thing in the room. The building was never yours. The marriage is finished. Patricia will send everything in writing. You have until the end of the month to take what's actually yours, which is your clothes, and go. He looked at Darnell. And you. Whatever she told you was waiting here. There was never anything here for you to take. There was only ever a family and a building and a man who knows how to keep both standing. He did not raise his voice. He did not look back. He walked out through his grandmother's green door into the clean morning air, and behind him, the room stayed silent. The paperwork spread across the table, mapping the exact shape of everything Simone had reached for and lost. 8 months later, the maples on the corner had turned, and Marcus sat on the back steps of the ground floor apartment with a cup of black coffee, watching his mother work in the small garden she'd asked him to build her along the south fence. He'd laid the raised beds himself, board by cedar board, and the late tomatoes hung heavy and split-skinned on the vines. More than 2 people could ever eat. Eleanor gave the surplus to Mrs. Okafor and the other tenants. The building was full and well kept and humming with the ordinary sounds of people living decent lives in a place that was cared for. He had bought a 5th building that summer, an old corner store he was restoring into apartments his crew had nearly finished. And the work had brought him into the path of a woman named Renee, an architect who specialized in historic preservation, who had walked through his job site asking precise questions about the original joinery and never once asked what he was worth. She came by on Sundays sometimes. She and Eleanor had taken to each other. Marcus didn't rush it. Some things you build slow so they hold. Simone, he heard through a cousin, had moved to a 1-bedroom apartment across the river and taken a job at a department store cosmetics counter. Darnell Price had vanished the week the 3rd fraud complaint was filed, owing her, the cousin said, several $1,000s she'd given him to invest. Her own sister had stopped returning her calls. She had reached for a building and ended up with a counter and a debt and a phone that no longer rang. Marcus registered all of it the way you register a settled foundation noted, and then set aside. He finished his coffee. His mother straightened in the garden, pressed a hand to her back, and waved him over to look at something coming up green in the far bed. He went. The morning was bright, and the brick was warm, and the door behind him was still painted his grandmother's green. Some walls, he thought. You only know are load-bearing once somebody tries to take them out. His grandmother had built this one to last, and he had simply kept it standing. He had kept everything worth keeping. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.